Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It is December 11th. Sitting in my car in a parking lot, getting some emails knocked out. And interesting trend going on. So, for the last probably decade or so, we've been hearing about these baby boomers leaving. And I'm going to make a comment about that phenomenon. So, for 10, 15 years, I've been hearing about this retirement group looking to exit their business. So, those baby boomers were supposed to leave because they were aging out according to the 65-year, retirement age. And yet when someone tells me that because they read that in the press, I was anecdotally saying to them for the better part of the last 10 years, I haven't seen it yet until last year and this year. So now we are seeing it. But there's some interesting dynamics to that group. If you think about those baby boomers, between 65 and 75 years old. 20 years ago, they were my age, 55, 56, and they were still operating their businesses. And I want you to anecdotally go back and think about what were the crises from an economic standpoint that have occurred in the past 20 years that this particular group was navigating. So we had the dot-com, we had the Great Recession, we had COVID, we've had some, for some of them, 9/11. They may have had their businesses during 9/11. So with each one of those major events, there very often were dramatic financial impacts to their businesses, which has forced them to hold their businesses, which is why when I think about these folks, they weren't coming to market when they were supposed to be coming to market. It's because they couldn't afford to go to market and sell their businesses. So here's a new phenomenon that's happening. So we are seeing folks who have prepared, they've recovered, they're in the transition phase and they're selling. But now we're seeing folks that have held on too long in some regards. Doesn't mean their businesses aren't valuable. It doesn't mean their businesses aren't, good businesses. But in a lot of cases, they've even transitioned out to an absentee owner type scenario. And the businesses aren't operationally run as well as they were when there was an operator in place. This is particularly the case in service sector businesses and in the restaurant space, where eyes of an owner usually account for 5-6 points of margin impact. In the restaurant space, we see waste, we see theft, usually in bars as well. We see employee theft or a lot of waste. And those pennies and nickels and dimes, if you've ever watched the show Bar Rescue, they add up. And when an owner's not on site active in a business for age, retirement, health, things start to slip. Now, does that make those businesses bad businesses? Absolutely not. Quite the opposite. I would tell you that, I've had 2 or 3 in the last year that have been around a long, long time. We're talking more than 5 decades, where new ownership, and one in particular here in Polk County, where new ownership stepped in and we saw significant improvement in the gross margin because they were an operator. Not an operator behind the kitchen, but an operator that, with a little bit more vim and vigor, or piss and vinegar, was able to make the improvements and tighten up the operational processes to drive sales and costs and efficiencies. So if you're a buyer in the market and you see a business that has that much goodwill, that has existed and done strong revenues, but the profit margins aren't in line with where they should be, you need to assess the overhead, you need to assess the labor, and you need to assess that opportunity with relation to what you're going to do with it. Even if the business is slightly overpriced, that goodwill is worth a tremendous amount. If you have a business that's been there 50 years and the revenues are consistently $1.5 to $1.7 million, and there's a liquor license that's worth $200,000 on the exchange market, and they're asking 500, yet they're only making 100. Well, I can darn tell you exactly what's going on. Either it's the cost of goods, and there's waste and portion management issues in the kitchen, or their menu sucks in terms of what they're serving. You know, seafood versus true bar food. Chicken is cheaper than seafood, that type of stuff. Or if there's a bar involved, they're losing it at the tap. They're losing it at the counter, and that's either theft or poor bar execution. So my point is that those opportunities should be really, really drilled into, because you're not going to get that goodwill. Now, can you finance that with a bank? Probably not, because the bank's far more mercenary about it, unless you've got a track record of turnaround. But you can take that data and translate to the seller and get better terms, because the reality is they're not going to get a bank to finance. And if it's listed with a broker, the broker's probably already told them that. So don't be pushed off by downside margins on the net side relative to consistent revenues on these longer term businesses that are being transitioned by baby boomers.